The old tractor sat in the corner of the barn like a forgotten monument, rust eating away at its green paint while cobwebs draped across the steering wheel like funeral shrouds. I never thought much about it until the day I found myself alone on 700 acres that should have been mine, watching my cousin Jason Thompson load up the last of Grandpa Richard Lewis furniture into his pickup truck. The will had been read, the lawyers had spoken, and according to every piece of paper in existence, this land belonged to him now. But something about the way he avoided looking at that tractor, something about how he kept glancing at it nervously while he worked, made me wonder what secrets it might be hiding. 3 months earlier, I had been living in my final foster placement, counting down the days until my 18th birthday when the system would officially wash its hands of me. Nancy Bailey had been kind enough, letting me stay in her spare room while I finished high school. But we both knew it was temporary. I had been in the system since I was 7, bouncing between homes and families who meant well, but never quite clicked. The social workers always said my parents died in a car accident, that I had no other family, that I was truly alone in the world. It was a story I had accepted, even if it left a hollow ache in my chest that never quite went away. Then the letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, delivered by a lawyer named Charles Price, who drove all the way from 3 counties over to find me. Nancy called me down from my room, her voice tight with confusion, and I found this tall man in a wrinkled suit sitting at our kitchen table with a manila envelope in his hands. He looked at me with sad eyes and said the words that would change everything. "Your grandfather, Richard Lewis, passed away last month. He left you his farm." I stared at him, certain he had the wrong person. I told him there must be some mistake, that I did not have any family, that the system had made that very clear. But Charles Price just opened his envelope and pulled out documents that proved otherwise. Birth certificates, adoption records, a trail of paperwork that showed how I had been taken from my grandfather when I was 7 after my parents died, placed in foster care while he fought a legal battle he ultimately lost. The state had deemed him too old, too set in his ways, unfit to raise a traumatized child. He had been forced to watch from a distance as I grew up in the system, forbidden from contact, but never forgetting. The lawyer explained that Richard Lewis had spent 11 years trying to find a way back to me, working with attorneys and social workers, always hitting dead ends and bureaucratic walls. But he never stopped hoping. In his will, he had left me everything. 700 acres of farmland in a small town called Milbrook, a 2-story farmhouse that had been in our family for 3 generations, and enough money in savings to keep the place running for at least a year. He had also left a letter, sealed and addressed to me in handwriting that looked shaky but determined. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. I remember sitting in that kitchen, holding the letter with trembling hands while Nancy rubbed my shoulder and Charles Price waited patiently for my reaction. The envelope felt heavy, weighted with years of longing and regret. Inside, my grandfather had written about watching me from afar, about the nights he spent wondering if I remembered him, about the farm he had maintained in hopes that someday I would come home. He wrote about my parents, about how proud they would have been of the young woman I had become, about family traditions and stories he wished he could have shared with me. At the end, he apologized for failing to fight harder, for letting the system take me away, for all the birthdays and holidays and ordinary moments we had missed. The next few weeks passed in a blur of paperwork and preparations. Charles Price helped me navigate the legal requirements, explaining that the inheritance was mine free and clear, though there were some distant relatives who might contest the will. Nancy helped me pack my few belongings, her eyes bright with tears she tried to hide. She kept saying how happy she was for me, how this was like something out of a fairy tale, but I could see the worry in her face. She knew as I did that I was about to step into a completely unknown world with no safety net and no experience. The drive to Milbrook took 4 hours through rolling countryside that grew more rural with each passing mile. Charles Price had offered to drive me, but I insisted on taking the bus, needing time to process what was happening. I pressed my face to the window and watched farmhouses and fields scroll past, trying to imagine my grandfather working this same land, living in the house that was now mine. The closer we got, the more real it became, and the more terrified I felt. Milbrook turned out to be the kind of small town where everyone knew everyone, where the main street consisted of a feed store, a diner, a bank, and not much else. The bus dropped me off in front of the post office, and I stood there with my 2 suitcases and a backpack, feeling completely out of place. Charles Price had arranged to meet me at the farm, but I decided to walk, needing to see the town that would supposedly be my new home. People stared as I made my way down the sidewalk, not unkindly, but with the frank curiosity of folks who did not see many strangers. An elderly woman sweeping her porch called out a greeting, asking if I was Richard Lewis' granddaughter. When I nodded, her face broke into a warm smile, and she introduced herself as Joan Castillo. She told me how sorry she was for my loss, how Richard had been a good man who talked about me all the time. She said the whole town had been wondering when I would come, that everyone was eager to meet me. The farm sat 2 miles outside of town, accessible by a gravel road that wound through fields of corn stubble and winter wheat. I saw the house first, a white 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and green shutters, exactly the kind of place I had dreamed about during my loneliest nights in foster care. The barn stood behind it, red paint faded but still sturdy, and beyond that stretched acres and acres of farmland that rolled toward the horizon like a brown and green quilt. Charles Price was waiting on the porch, and beside him stood a man I did not recognize. This was Jason Thompson, my cousin, the son of my grandfather's brother, who had died several years earlier. Jason was maybe 30, with the kind of weathered hands and sun-darkened skin that spoke of a lifetime of outdoor work. He shook my hand politely enough, but there was something in his eyes that made me uncomfortable, a calculating look that did not match his friendly words. We toured the house together, Charles Price pointing out various features, while Jason remained mostly silent. The place was clean, but clearly showed the signs of an elderly man living alone. The furniture was old but well-maintained, family photos covered every surface, and the kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and bacon grease. My grandfather had prepared for my arrival, stocking the refrigerator and leaving detailed notes about everything from the furnace to the well pump. It was clear he had hoped right up until the end that I would come home. That first night, I lay in the bed that had been my father's when he was a boy, staring at the ceiling and listening to the absolute silence of the countryside. No traffic, no sirens, no sounds of other people living their lives just beyond thin walls. For someone who had spent 11 years in group homes and foster houses, the quiet was almost overwhelming. I found myself wondering if I had made a terrible mistake, if I was really cut out for this kind of life. The next morning brought my first real challenge. Jason appeared at my door bright and early, explaining that he had been helping my grandfather run the farm for the past few years. He offered to continue doing so, to handle all the complicated aspects of farming while I learned the ropes. It sounded reasonable enough, but something about his eagerness made me hesitate. I told him I needed time to think about it, to get my bearings before making any major decisions. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into learning everything I could about the farm and the land I had inherited. I read my grandfather's detailed journals, studied agricultural reports, and spent hours walking the fields and exploring the outbuildings. The place was bigger and more complex than I had imagined, with different crops planted in careful rotation, livestock that needed daily care, and equipment that required constant maintenance. Jason continued to offer his help, showing up most mornings with coffee and advice about what needed to be done. He introduced me to the neighbors, helped me understand the local farming community, and generally made himself indispensable. But I noticed things that bothered me. The way he spoke about the farm as if it were partially his, how he had keys to every building and seemed to know where everything was stored. What was troubling was how he talked about my grandfather, always with respect, but with an undercurrent of something I could not quite identify. The first real conflict came when I mentioned wanting to update my grandfather's will and insurance policies. Jason immediately suggested I should consider selling the farm, arguing that it was too much responsibility for someone with no experience. He offered to help me find a buyer, even mentioned that he might be interested in purchasing some of the acreage himself. When I firmly declined, explaining that I wanted to honor my grandfather's wishes and learn to run the place myself, his friendly demeanor shifted slightly. He became more insistent, more urgent in his arguments about why I should reconsider. That night, I called Charles Price and told him about my concerns. The lawyer listened carefully, then admitted he had been having his own doubts about Jason's involvement. He explained that during the probate process, Jason had been very interested in the details of the will, asking questions that seemed to go beyond normal family curiosity. Charles suggested I might want to have my own lawyer review everything, just to be safe. The next day, I drove to the county seat and met with Lisa Wilson, a young attorney who specialized in estate and agricultural law. I brought all the paperwork Charles Price had given me, along with my grandfather's personal documents and journals. Lisa spent several hours reviewing everything, asking detailed questions about Jason's relationship with my grandfather and his current involvement with the farm. What she told me made my blood run cold. While everything appeared to be in order on the surface, there were some irregularities that concerned her. The will had been updated just 6 months before my grandfather's death, and Jason had been present during several meetings with the original lawyer. More troubling, there were financial records showing that Jason had been receiving regular payments from my grandfather's account, ostensibly for farm work, but the amounts seemed excessive for part-time labor. Lisa advised me to be very careful about making any decisions regarding Jason's continued involvement. She also suggested we conduct a thorough inventory of the farm's assets, including equipment, livestock, and stored crops. If Jason had been taking advantage of an elderly man, there might be evidence of missing property or financial irregularities. That weekend, I began my inventory, starting with the barn and working my way through each outbuilding. Jason offered to help, but I politely declined, saying I wanted to learn where everything was located myself. He seemed agitated by this, more insistent than usual that I was taking on too much too quickly. But I persevered, making detailed lists and taking photographs of everything I found. It was in the old machinery shed that I made the first disturbing discovery. According to my grandfather's insurance records, there should have been a nearly new hay baler worth $15,000. But the machine I found was ancient, probably worth a few $100s at most. When I asked Jason about it, he claimed my grandfather had sold the newer baler last year to help with expenses. But there was no record of such a sale in any of the financial documents I had reviewed. The pattern continued as I worked through the inventory. Expensive tools that should have been there were missing or replaced with cheaper alternatives. A prize bull that was listed in my grandfather's breeding records was nowhere to be found. Jason had explanations for everything, but none of them quite added up when I compared them to my grandfather's meticulous record keeping. The breaking point came when I decided to have the farm's financial records professionally audited. Jason became openly hostile when I told him about my plans, arguing that I was wasting money on unnecessary professional fees. He accused me of not trusting family, of being ungrateful for all the help he had provided. His anger was so intense and so sudden that it confirmed all my suspicions. That night, I called Lisa Wilson and told her what I had discovered. She advised me to document everything carefully and to consider filing a police report if the evidence supported theft charges. But she also warned me that proving financial elder abuse could be difficult, especially since Jason was family and had been trusted by my grandfather. The next morning, Jason arrived at my door with a different attitude entirely. Gone was the helpful cousin routine, replaced by a cold, businesslike demeanor. He informed me that he had been thinking about our conversation, and he believed there had been a misunderstanding about my inheritance. He claimed that my grandfather had promised him a significant portion of the farm in exchange for his years of help and support. To back up his claim, Jason produced a document that he said was my grandfather's real will, one that left him half of the farm and most of the valuable equipment. The paper looked official enough, complete with notary seals and witness signatures, but something about it felt wrong. The language was different from my grandfather's usual way of speaking, and the date was just 2 weeks before his death, which seemed suspicious given his declining health. I told Jason I would need to have the document reviewed by my attorney, but he became increasingly agitated. He demanded that I accept the will immediately and begin the process of transferring half the property to him. When I refused, he threatened to take the matter to court, claiming that I was trying to cheat him out of his rightful inheritance. The confrontation escalated quickly, with Jason becoming more aggressive and demanding. He accused me of being an outsider who had no right to the family land, someone who had abandoned my grandfather and only showed up when there was money involved. His words stung because part of me wondered if they were true. Had I really deserved this inheritance, when I had not even known my grandfather existed. After Jason left, I sat on the porch and cried for the first time since arriving at the farm. The stress of the situation combined with the isolation and responsibility felt overwhelming. I found myself questioning whether I should just give up, sell the farm, and return to the life I knew. At least in the foster system, I understood the rules and expectations. But as I sat there feeling poorly for myself, I noticed something I had overlooked before. The old tractor in the barn, the one that Jason always seemed nervous around, was positioned strangely. Instead of being parked normally, it was angled in such a way that it blocked access to a workbench behind it. My grandfather had been meticulous about organization, so this seemed out of character. Curious, I went into the barn and tried to move the tractor. It was heavier than I expected, but with some effort, I managed to push it aside enough to reach the workbench. What I found there changed everything. Hidden beneath a tarp and secured in a metal box was another copy of my grandfather's will, along with a letter addressed to me and dated just 1 week before his death. The will was identical to the one Charles Price had shown me, leaving me the entire farm with no mention of Jason receiving anything. But the letter was what really mattered. In shaky handwriting, my grandfather had written about his growing suspicions regarding Jason's behavior. He had discovered that equipment was missing, that money was being withdrawn from his accounts without authorization, and that Jason had been pressuring him to change his will. My grandfather wrote that he had become afraid of Jason, worried that his nephew might try to forge documents or manipulate the inheritance process. So he had hidden this backup copy of his real will, along with evidence of Jason's theft, in the one place he knew his nephew would never think to look. The old tractor had been my father's favorite as a boy, and my grandfather knew that Jason, who had always resented my father's place in the family, would avoid it out of spite. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, receipts for equipment that had been sold without my grandfather's knowledge, and even photographs of valuable items that had gone missing. My grandfather had been building a case against Jason, documenting everything carefully in preparation for a confrontation that his death had prevented. I called Lisa Wilson immediately and arranged to meet her the next morning. Together, we reviewed all the evidence, and she confirmed that we had more than enough to file criminal charges against Jason. The forged will he had shown me was clearly fraudulent, created using a template and fake notary seals. The real question was how to proceed without putting myself in danger. Lisa advised me to contact the sheriff's department and let them handle the confrontation with Jason. She also suggested that I might want to stay somewhere else for a few days while the investigation got underway. But I refused to be driven from my home, especially now that I knew the truth about what my grandfather had endured. The sheriff, Anthony Watson, was a kind man in his 50s who had known my grandfather for decades. He listened to my story with growing anger, explaining that elder abuse was a serious problem in rural communities, where older farmers were often isolated and vulnerable. He assured me that Jason would be arrested and charged appropriately, but he also warned me to be careful until the situation was resolved. That afternoon, Sheriff Watson and 2 deputies arrived at the farm just as Jason was pulling into the driveway. I watched from the porch as they approached his truck, official and businesslike in their movements. Jason's face went white when he saw them, and I could tell he knew exactly why they were there. The arrest was swift and professional. Jason tried to argue, claiming that I had planted the evidence and was trying to frame him, but the sheriff was not interested in his excuses. As they loaded him into the patrol car, Jason looked at me with such hatred that I actually stepped back. He shouted something about how I would never be able to run the farm alone, how I was just a foster kid who did not belong here. His words hurt, but they also strengthened my resolve. I had found my grandfather's legacy, and I was determined to honor it properly. Over the next few weeks, as the criminal case against Jason moved forward, I threw myself into learning everything I could about farming. I hired Dennis Clark, an experienced farmhand who had worked for several local operations, to help me understand the day-to-day requirements of running the place. Dennis was everything Jason was not: honest, patient, and genuinely interested in teaching me rather than taking advantage. He had known my grandfather and spoke about him with real affection, sharing stories about the kind of man he had been and the reputation he had built in the community. Through Dennis, I began to understand that my inheritance was not just land and buildings, but a place in a community that had respected and valued my grandfather. The legal resolution took several months, but eventually Jason pleaded guilty to elder abuse and theft charges. He was sentenced to prison time and ordered to make full restitution for everything he had stolen. The forged will was officially declared fraudulent, confirming my legal ownership of the entire farm. More importantly, the truth about what had happened became public knowledge, and the community's support for me grew stronger. Joan Castillo, the elderly woman who had greeted me on my first day in town, became like a grandmother to me. She taught me about preserving food, shared family recipes that had been passed down for generations, and helped me understand the social dynamics of small-town life. Through her, I met other families who welcomed me into their circle, treating me not as an outsider, but as Richard Lewis' granddaughter who had finally come home. The first harvest season was challenging, but rewarding. With Dennis' guidance and help from neighboring farmers, I managed to bring in a successful corn crop and learn the basics of agricultural economics. I made mistakes, of course, but the community was patient and supportive, understanding that I was learning a completely new way of life. As winter approached, I found myself settling into a routine that felt natural and satisfying. Morning chores, equipment maintenance, planning for the next growing season, and evening hours spent reading my grandfather's journals and learning about family history I had never known. The house began to feel like home rather than just a place I was staying. The transformation was not just external. For the first time in my life, I felt truly rooted somewhere, connected to something larger than myself. The land became familiar, each field and fence line memorized through daily walks and seasonal work. I learned the names of birds and plants, understood weather patterns and soil conditions, developed the kind of practical knowledge that can only come from direct experience. Spring brought new challenges and new growth, both for the farm and for me. I decided to expand the operation slightly, adding a small vegetable garden that I could sell at the local farmers market. Judith Young, who ran the market, became another mentor, teaching me about marketing produce and connecting with customers. Through her, I learned that farming was not just about growing things, but about building relationships and serving the community. The anniversary of my grandfather's death was difficult, but it was also a time for reflection on how much had changed. I visited his grave for the first time, bringing flowers from the garden he had planted behind the house. Standing there, I finally felt ready to speak to him, to thank him for the gift he had given me, and to promise that I would take care of the land he had loved. That summer, I received a letter from Nancy Bailey, my former foster mother. She had been following my progress through occasional phone calls and was planning to visit the farm. When she arrived, I was struck by how different I must have looked to her. Gone was the uncertain teenager who had left her house with 2 suitcases. In her place was a young woman who moved with confidence, who spoke knowledgeably about crop rotation and soil management, who clearly belonged where she was. Nancy spent a week with me, helping with the harvest and meeting the people who had become my extended family. On her last night, we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the fields golden red. She told me how proud she was of what I had accomplished, how obvious it was that I had found my place in the world. But more than that, she said I had found myself. The second winter was easier than the first. I had established routines, built relationships, and developed the skills needed to maintain the farm through the quiet months. I spent time planning improvements for the coming year, reading agricultural journals, and attending workshops offered by the county extension office. I also began dating Olivia King, a teacher at the local elementary school who shared my love of the land and community. By the time spring returned again, I had been transformed from a lost foster child into a confident young farmer. The community no longer saw me as Richard Lewis' granddaughter, who had inherited the farm, but as someone who had earned her place through hard work and dedication. I had proven myself not just as a landowner, but as a neighbor and friend. The third harvest was my most successful yet. I had expanded the vegetable operation, added a small orchard, and even begun raising a few head of cattle. The farm was not just surviving, but thriving, generating enough income to support improvements and expansion. More importantly, I was contributing to the community in ways that went beyond economic impact. I joined the school board, volunteered with the local 4-H chapter, and helped organize community events. The shy teenager who had arrived with nothing but 2 suitcases had become someone who others looked to for leadership and advice. It was a transformation that sometimes surprised even me, but it felt natural and right. As I write this now, 5 years after that first bus ride to Milbrook, I am sitting in the same kitchen where Charles Price first told me about my inheritance. The house has been updated and modernized, but it still carries the warmth and character that my grandfather built into it. The farm has grown and prospered, but it remains true to the values and traditions he established. The old tractor still sits in the barn, though now it is properly maintained and occasionally used for light work around the property. I keep it as a reminder of how close I came to losing everything and of the importance of looking beyond the obvious when something does not feel right. Jason served his time and has since moved away from the area, but his attempt to steal my inheritance taught me valuable lessons about trust and vigilance. More than anything, though, this experience taught me about the power of belonging. For 18 years, I had drifted through life without roots, without a sense of place or purpose. The foster system had provided safety and basic needs, but it could not give me the thing I craved most, a place where I truly belonged. Finding my grandfather's farm was not just about inheriting property or money. It was about discovering who I was meant to be, about connecting with family history and community traditions that gave my life meaning and direction. It was about learning that family is not just about blood relationships, but about the people who choose to support and include you. The community of Milbrook embraced me not because I was Richard Lewis' granddaughter, but because I proved myself willing to work hard, to contribute, and to honor the values they held dear. They taught me that belonging is something you earn through your actions, not something you are automatically entitled to receive. I think about the young woman who stepped off that bus 5 years ago, scared and uncertain about what lay ahead. She could never have imagined the life I am living now, the confidence I have gained, or the deep satisfaction that comes from working land that has been in my family for generations. She was looking for a place to belong, and she found something even better. She found herself. The farm continues to evolve and grow, as do I. Last year, I married Olivia in a ceremony held in the front yard, surrounded by friends and neighbors who have become my chosen family. We are planning to start our own family soon, to continue the legacy that my grandfather preserved for me. The house that once felt too quiet now rings with laughter and conversation, filled with the sounds of a life fully lived. I have also become involved in advocacy work, helping other young people who are aging out of the foster system. I speak at conferences and workshops, sharing my story and encouraging others to believe that their circumstances do not define their potential. I have established a scholarship fund to help foster children pursue agricultural education, hoping to give others the same kind of second chance that I received. The legal battles with Jason taught me the importance of protecting vulnerable people from those who would take advantage of them. I work with elder advocacy groups and have helped several families navigate similar situations. It is my way of honoring my grandfather's memory and ensuring that his suffering was not in vain. But perhaps the most important thing I have learned is that home is not just a place you live, but a place where you are known and valued for who you truly are. The farm is home because it connects me to my past and my future, because it gives me purpose and identity, because it is where I belong. Every morning when I walk out to check on the animals and survey the fields, I'm reminded of how different my life could have been. If Charles Price had not found me, if my grandfather had not fought to leave me this inheritance, if I had not had the courage to stay and fight for what was mine, I might still be drifting through life without roots or purpose. The responsibility of owning and operating a farm is not easy, especially for someone who started with no experience or background. There are still days when equipment breaks down, when weather threatens crops, when financial pressures create stress and worry. But these challenges feel different now because I am facing them in a place where I belong, surrounded by people who support and believe in me. I have learned to read the sky for weather signs, to judge soil conditions by feel, to recognize the subtle changes that indicate when crops are ready for harvest. These skills connect me to generations of farmers who work this same land, who face similar challenges and celebrated similar successes. I am part of a continuum that stretches back through my family history and forward to the children Olivia and I hope to raise here. The seasonal rhythms of farm life have become the structure around which I organize my days and years. Spring planting, summer cultivation, fall harvest, winter planting. Each season brings its own requirements and rewards, its own lessons and satisfactions. I have learned to live in harmony with natural cycles, to work with the land rather than against it. The community has also taught me about the importance of mutual support and cooperation. During harvest time, neighbors help neighbors without expectation of immediate reciprocation, knowing that their own turn for assistance will come. During difficult times, whether caused by weather, illness, or financial hardship, the community rallies to provide whatever help is needed. This spirit of cooperation extends beyond practical matters to social and emotional support as well. When I was struggling to learn farm management, experienced farmers shared their knowledge freely. When I was dealing with the stress of Jason's legal challenges, friends and neighbors offered encouragement and practical assistance. When I was ready to expand the operation, the local bank provided financing based not just on my financial qualifications, but on the community's faith in my character and commitment. I have tried to give back in the same spirit, helping newer farmers learn the ropes, volunteering for community projects, and supporting local businesses and organizations. This reciprocal relationship has deepened my sense of belonging and made me feel truly integrated into the fabric of rural life. The transformation from foster child to farm owner has not been just about learning new skills or adapting to a different lifestyle. It has been about discovering who I really am when I am free to choose my own path. Away from the constraints and limitations of institutional care, I have been able to explore my interests, develop my talents, and build the kind of life I want to live. I discovered that I have a natural affinity for working with plants and animals, an intuitive understanding of natural systems that surprised even me. I found that I enjoy the physical demands of farm work, the satisfaction of completing concrete tasks, the visible results of hard labor. I learned that I am stronger and more resilient than I ever imagined, capable of handling challenges that once would have overwhelmed me. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that I have the capacity to build meaningful relationships and to contribute positively to a community. The social skills I developed in foster care, the ability to adapt to new situations and connect with different types of people, turned out to be valuable assets in rural life. The empathy and understanding that came from my own experiences with loss and displacement helped me connect with others who were facing their own challenges. The farm has also given me a sense of purpose that extends beyond my own personal fulfillment. I am preserving agricultural land for future generations, producing food for my community, maintaining traditions and practices that have sustained rural life for centuries. This work feels meaningful in a way that goes beyond individual achievement or success. I think often about my grandfather and the sacrifices he made to preserve this inheritance for me. The years he spent fighting the legal system, the loneliness he endured while separated from his only grandchild, the careful planning required to ensure that his legacy would reach me despite the obstacles. His love and determination created the foundation for everything I have built since. The letters and journals he left behind have become precious treasures, windows into family history and personal wisdom that guide me still. His practical advice about farming techniques and financial management has proven invaluable, but his emotional insights about the importance of persistence, integrity, and community connection have been even more meaningful. I wish he could see what the farm has become, how it has grown and prospered under my care. I wish he could meet Olivia and see how happy we are together. I wish he could know that his sacrifice was not in vain, that the granddaughter he fought so hard to help has found her way home at last. But in many ways, I feel his presence every day. In the sunrise over fields he planted, in the solid construction of buildings he maintained, in the respect and affection of neighbors who remember him fondly. The farm itself is a living memorial to his life and values, and by caring for it properly, I honor his memory and continue his legacy. The legal victory over Jason was important not just for practical reasons, but for emotional ones as well. It validated my grandfather's judgment and vindicated his trust in me. It also demonstrated that justice can prevail even when the odds seem stacked against you, that truth and evidence can overcome deception and manipulation. The experience taught me to trust my instincts when something feels wrong, to investigate thoroughly before making important decisions, and to seek help from qualified professionals when facing complex challenges. These lessons have served me well in other aspects of farm management and life in general. Looking back now, I can see that everything happened exactly as it needed to. The years in foster care taught me resilience and adaptability. The initial challenges with Jason forced me to develop legal and financial literacy. The support of the community helped me understand the importance of relationships and mutual aid. Each difficulty became a learning opportunity that prepared me for greater responsibilities and achievements. The transformation from that scared 18-year-old to the confident woman I am today did not happen overnight. It required years of hard work, countless mistakes and corrections, and the patient support of many people who believed in my potential, even when I doubted it myself. But the foundation for this transformation was the sense of belonging that came from finally finding my place in the world. This farm is more than just my home and business. It is the physical manifestation of family love that transcended death, bureaucracy, and time. It is proof that some bonds cannot be broken by distance or circumstance, that some legacies are too important to be lost. It is a testament to the power of hope and determination in the face of seemingly impossible obstacles. Every day I spend here is a gift that I try not to take for granted. The simple pleasure of morning coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over fields that belong to me, the satisfaction of a successful harvest, knowing that my hard work has produced something valuable and necessary, the joy of sharing this life with someone I love, building our own traditions while honoring those that came before. The future stretches ahead full of possibilities and plans. Olivia and I talk about the children we want to raise here, about the improvements we want to make to the farm, about the ways we can contribute to the community that has given us so much. We dream about expanding the operation, maybe adding agritourism or specialty crops, finding new ways to make the land productive and sustainable. But we also understand that the most important thing is not what we accomplish, but how we live. The values my grandfather embodied, hard work, integrity, generosity, and commitment to community, are the ones we want to pass on to the next generation. The farm will continue to evolve and change, but its essential character should remain constant. I often think about other young people who are aging out of foster care right now, facing the same uncertainty and fear that I once knew so well. I want them to know that their circumstances do not define their potential, that amazing opportunities can come from unexpected directions, that it is never too late to find where you belong. Not everyone will inherit a farm, of course, but everyone deserves the chance to discover their own version of home. Whether that is a place, a career, a relationship, or a community, the search for belonging is universal. The key is to remain open to possibilities, to work hard when opportunities arise, and to believe that you deserve good things even when your past suggests otherwise. My story is ultimately about the triumph of love over abandonment, of hope over despair, of belonging over isolation. It is about the power of one person's determination to preserve a legacy for someone they might never see again. It is about the capacity of communities to embrace newcomers and help them find their place. But it is also about the responsibility that comes with being given a second chance. The farm was not just a gift, but a trust, a responsibility to honor the past while building for the future. The community's acceptance was not just welcoming, but expectant, assuming that I would contribute as well as receive. The love I found was not just comforting, but demanding, requiring me to become worthy of it. 5 years later, I can honestly say that I have become the person my grandfather hoped I would be. Not perfect, certainly, but someone who works hard, treats others with respect, and takes care of what has been entrusted to her. Someone who has learned to give as well as receive, to lead as well as follow, to build as well as preserve. The scared teenager who stepped off that bus in Milbrook was looking for a place to belong. She found something even more valuable. She found herself. She discovered strengths she did not know she possessed, talents she had never had the chance to develop, and a capacity for love and commitment that years of institutional care had not diminished. Today, when I walk through the fields that my great-grandfather cleared and my grandfather maintained, I feel the weight and joy of belonging to something larger than myself. I am part of a story that began long before I was born and will continue long after I am gone. I am a link in a chain that connects past to future, a guardian of traditions and values that have sustained families and communities for generations. The old tractor still sits in the barn, no longer hiding secrets, but serving as a reminder of how close I came to losing everything. Sometimes I sit on its worn seat and think about the journey that brought me here, about the people who helped along the way, about the challenges that tested my resolve, and the victories that confirmed my place. If you are watching this and wondering where you belong, if you are facing your own challenges or searching for your own version of home, I want you to know that it is possible to find your place in this world. It may not come easily or quickly, and it may not look like what you expected, but it is out there waiting for you. The key is to remain open to possibilities, to work hard when opportunities arise, and to trust that you deserve good things even when your past suggests otherwise. Surround yourself with people who believe in your potential, seek help when you need it, and never give up on the dream of finding where you truly belong. My grandfather's farm taught me that home is not just a place you live, but a place where you are known and valued for who you truly are. It is where your work has meaning, where your presence makes a difference, where you are part of something larger and more enduring than yourself. I hope my story inspires you to keep searching for your own version of home, to believe in the possibility of transformation, and to trust that sometimes the most unexpected gifts come from the most unlikely sources. Thank you for listening to my journey from foster care to farm ownership, from isolation to belonging, from uncertainty to home. If this story moved you, please subscribe to hear more stories like this one. Share your own experiences with unexpected opportunities or finding where you belong in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Until next time, remember that you belong somewhere, and it is worth the journey to find that place.